Hello and welcome to Diecast Diaries, and welcome to the first video in a new series on the channel where instead of looking at a particular range by a specific manufacturer, I'm actually going to focus on an individual vehicle type and look how different diecast manufacturers have covered it over the years. So for the first one of these, I thought I'd pick one of my all-time favourite vehicles, which is the DUKW amphibious truck. Very famous vehicle, very distinctive looking vehicle. And I think that's probably why it's actually been pretty well served in the diecast world. There's quite a number of different models of it in varying scales that have been produced over the years. Now, models I've got here, it's by no means an exhaustive list of every single model of a W that's ever been produced, but I like to think it's a pretty good representation of how different manufacturers have covered it, various different scales and that kind of over the years. So before I get into that, I just thought it'd be good to have a bit of a quick overview of the vehicle in question, especially as it is sort of, quite an interesting vehicle. So one of the obvious questions is, what does DUKW actually stand for? There's been kind of lots of theories of this over the year. It does seem to have been an amazing coincidence that a vehicle that was amphibious happens to have this as part of its name, but it does seem that it is nothing more than a happy coincidence. So the vehicle was produced by a joint venture between boat designers Sparkman and Stevens and GMC, obviously a well-known American truck manufacturer. And DUKW just happens to have been GMC's model name for it. D just meant that the production year of 1942, which was when the vehicle was first introduced. U seems to have stood for utility, or utility amphibian. K simply meant that it was all-wheel drive, and W that it had dual rear axles. It was based on the chassis of the existing GMC 2.5 ton truck. And just for example, going back to kind of the model names, that was a CCKW. The C obviously referring in that case to 1941. The second C, I believe it referred to the type of cab it had, although I might be mistaken with that one. But again, it had the K and the W again, because it was all-wheel drive and dual rear axles. So yeah, nothing more than a happy coincidence as to how the name came about. It seems because must have been quite a revolutionary vehicle when the first examples were produced. That there was quite a lot of initial scepticism from the US military about how useful such a vehicle could be. But thankfully, that was completely dispelled after a US Coast Guard boat ran aground on a sandbar in a storm, and there was no other vessel that could get close to it to rescue the crew. Luckily, there happened to be an early model DUKW undergoing trials nearby, and despite a 60-knot wind, it was able to get right up to the boat, rescue the entire crew, and any scepticism or doubts about the vehicle just immediately vanished, and obviously it would end up going on to have quite a successful career. It's 31 foot long, so it's a pretty long vehicle, but it could attain a speed of 50 miles an hour on land and 6 miles an hour in water. It was probably the first vehicle to actually have a central tyre inflation system whereby the driver could adjust the tyre pressures from the cab, meaning that when it sort of like landed on a beach, if it was in soft sand, he could let some air out the tyres, give himself a bit more ground surface, get across the sand, and then when he hit a hard surface again, re-inflate the tyres, and off he went. It's a fairly common thing now in a lot of military vehicles, but at the time it must have been pretty revolutionary. Could carry up to 25 troops or a 5,000 pound payload. Its first use, actually in quite small numbers, was actually in the Pacific, but its first use in large numbers, and certainly its first use in Europe, was actually in Operation Husky, which was the invasion of Sicily in 1943, and then all subsequent amphibious operations, both in Western Europe and over in the Pacific, would involve the DUKW. Obviously, most notably, the D-Day landings on the 6th of June, 1944. It would also be used quite a lot in the Rhine crossings of March 45. And then because it was such a useful vehicle, it would stay in service for years afterwards with many different armies. The Americans themselves used them until the 60s. The British Army used them until the 70s, where I'm guessing it would have been replaced by the Alvis Stalwart. However, the Royal Marines actually kept hold of 5 until as late as 2012, re-engined with more economical diesels by that point, but they used them at their amphibious warfare training centre down in Devon. So yeah, only sort of within the last sort of 15 years that they've kind of finally been sold off. And then it actually had a wide civilian usage as well. Not only things like police and fire departments and lifeguard services and that kind of thing, but even sort of, I think to this day, used in sort of various city centres for giving tourist rides where it can also go on the river. Unfortunately, some of them have come into the headlines sort of fairly recently for accidents and incidents that have happened, which is a bit of a shame. But obviously they are operating kind of what are now 80-year-old vehicles. So yeah, so it's a vehicle that's had a very, very long service life, and as I say, in a lot of cases, that service life is still going. So onto the models themselves. Now, I've tried to do these in order of like oldest, like the ones that released the earliest, to like the most recent one. Some of them it's been a bit tricky to find out exactly when they were produced, but I think this is the earliest one. So it's actually produced by an American company called Comet, and it's part of their Authenticast range. Now, Comet were a die-cast company, not necessarily making toys, but in the 1930s, they started to make some toy soldiers. And then during World War II, they actually produced a huge range of models like this for recognition purposes for the US military, not only of Allied vehicles, but obviously of German vehicles, and I'm guessing sort of Japanese and Italian ones as well. And then after World War II, they'd carry on producing these as toys. Now, it seems that Comet lasted as a company until 1962, when the molds were then purchased by a company called Superior. So, as there's absolutely no details on this at all, and unfortunately I don't have the box for it, there's absolutely no way of telling exactly when this particular one dates from. It is a pretty sort of basic model. It's kind of pretty much all metal. I think it's like a couple of parts it kind of consists of. For the size of it, I mean, it's obviously not a big model, but it's pretty weighty. And yeah, as I say, detail is fairly basic, but it's quite nice. It's quite unusual for models, as we'll see with the other ones, in that not only does this one have the tilt over the cargo bed, it also has the small cover over the cab as well, which is something not really seen that often with the DUKW. So yeah, so as I say, I'm not entirely sure when this dates from, but as I say, it's got to be sometime between, well, I'd say the 40s up until the early 60s. So I'm guessing it's probably more likely to be the latter. So that's the DUKW made by Comet as part of their Authenticast range. And then what I think is the next one, chronologically, is one that I have already covered in my video on the Matchbox Leslie military range. So this is the one produced by Matchbox from 1958 to 1962. Now, it's by far the smallest model of the DUKW that I've got out of all the different models that I've got here. But I have to say, it's actually been done kind of pretty well. As I said in the Matchbox video when I covered this, I think they've got the proportions sort of pretty spot on. No windscreen, but it would have been extremely fragile in this kind of scale. They've actually modelled this one with the front wheels covered, because these like sort of spats or wheel covers, whatever you want to call them, could be removed for obviously ease of maintenance and access to the wheels. So it's obviously made to look like the rear one's been removed and the front ones are in place, which is kind of a nice touch. Kind of simple detail on the inside, but you've got details moulded in the bodywork there. You've got the splashboard that would be folded up when it's like driving off a ship into the water. This long tube, which is a feature of the DUKW, is actually a bilge pump. I think pretty much all of the vast majority of the models have that. As I say, obviously, it's quite a feature of the vehicle. And then you've got, obviously, there'd be like Pioneer tools. In this case, Matchbox would put an axe there. I think quite often it was like a spade or something. And then at the back, you've got the spare wheel, the winch, and the jerry can hold. Although it seems on the Matchbox one, they've actually got it the other way around. It should be jerry cans on this side and the spare wheel on the other. But it's a minor quibble. Obviously, on this one, there's no kind of underneath detail with any kind of like the propeller shaft or anything like that. But yeah, it's a pretty nice model. And as I say, for the size, I think they've done a good job of capturing the proportions of it. This next one, it was quite difficult to work out exactly when it was released. So this is a Lone Star DUKW, produced as part of their Modern Army series range. I think it seems to date from 1958 and was possibly produced until about 1960. Out of all the models I've got, this one is by far the least accurate. It's kind of a bit too short, really. As I say, DUKWs were long vehicles, so proportion-wise, it is a bit too short. Why they chose to do the steering wheel in red plastic, I've no idea. You know, black or obviously dark green would have made it look so much better. They've moulded the spare wheel so that it's actually on top of the bonnet instead of on the back. But obviously, by far the most obvious thing is this ridiculously oversized. What I'm guessing is it looks like a 50 caliber machine gun. Now, one in 4 DUKWs was actually armed with a 50 caliber machine gun, but they had it on like a ring mount above the cab, above the passenger seat on the cab. It was certainly not mounted on the back, and certainly nowhere near as oversized as this one is. Having said all that, there's something about this model that I do kind of quite like. Whether it's because it's not a particularly common one, I was lucky enough to get one quite a number of years ago now from a local toy fair. I think it cost me £10. It's unboxed, but it's in very good condition. And I don't know, something about the simplicity of it kind of just appeals to me a bit, really. There is at least one other version of this that Lone Star did, and that was, instead of the machine gun on the back, it had a missile launcher, which of course is even more inaccurate, and it looked kind of even more oversized. That's not one, as I've managed to get yet. I'd like to pick it up, but this one's definitely my favourite of the two. So this is the Lone Star, and you see underneath, you've got DUKW, a Lone Star product, Modern Army series, made in England. But yeah, it certainly has the feel of something from kind of like the late 50s, early 60s, but it was kind of difficult to find an exact production date for this. Kind of a bit of a shame about the where the rivet goes in there, but it's not too bad. But yeah, as I say, it's probably the least accurate version of the DUKW that I've got by any manufacturer. But yeah, something about it I actually quite like with that one. So that's the Lone Star one. As I say, there is at least one other version of that out there. And then we move on to the one produced by Dinky Toys France. And this was produced from 1963 to 1971. And this suddenly blows all the previous models out of the water. It's an excellent model, really well detailed, proportions are spot on. Detail is really good. You've got the sort of quite finely done windscreen. I think that's kind of done in sort of tin. It is metal. All the details around the front, obviously the headlights, the bilge bumpers are mentioned. The details at the back, jerry cans, the winch. Doesn't have a spare wheel, but that's, not all of it did it, but it's got a nice sort of bedroll that's kind of moulded on it there. And this was the first one to have any kind of detail underneath. And you can see it's got the propeller and the propeller shaft. Now this one, it's another one I've got that's unboxed. It was bought obviously off eBay secondhand. Whoops, just spilling some of its load there. I'll just put that to one side. So it does look like it has had a repair at some point. But French Dinkies do tend to be kind of quite a bit more expensive than their sort of British counterparts. And because it's underneath, it's not really sort of that obvious. The rest of the vehicle's in really good condition. So it wasn't sort of too expensive either. So I thought it was worth sort of, worth getting, definitely. One nice feature of this one is that it does actually have a removable bonnet. Not that there's any kind of detail underneath, but it's a nice feature to have. That's plastic, little bonnet on the top. And it came with this load of a couple of crates and some oil drums, which I'll just kind of put back in. And also the driver figure. So that's the French Dinky Toys one, and really that kind of set the bar pretty high, especially considering it came out as early as 1963. I think that's really an excellent model. Of course, unusually, obviously most models of the DUKW are in some form of World War II markings, either US Army or British Army, with like a big invasion star on the front. With this one being produced in France, and with France being one of many countries that used these for years after the war, it's, of course, in post-war French Army colours. But it is at least still in the kind of standard olive drab all over. Just got a couple of little, I think it's just one on the front, actually, just a simple little trickle there, just showing that it's French. But that's, yeah, a really nice model, that one. So that's the French Dinky Toys one. And then, talking of the English counterpart, Dinky themselves over in the UK did their own DUKW, produced from 1972 to 1978. Now this one, it's one of the most common models of the DUKW out there. It can be picked up for like just a few pounds. If you go on eBay, there's plenty of these about in various kind of different states. So not a rare model by any means. I would say it's probably my least favourite of all the DUKW models out there. It's very simple, especially considering as relatively late that it was produced that it was, compared to the French Dinky one at least. It's basically two kind of bits of die cast. There is like a separate casting for the chassis. You see it's just riveted together, but the top bit, it's just all one piece. Now, admittedly, there is some really nice detail on this. They've even moulded the star on the bonnet, even moulded the windscreen frame. You've got all the details on the back, the winch, the spare wheel. It's even made up like one of the actual dinky wheels that they've done on the back there, which is kind of quite nice. Empty jerry can holder on the back there. No propeller shaft, but you can at least see where it would be. But I don't know, there's just something a bit too basic about this. I think also the vertical windscreen tends to suggest it's one of the earlier production ones, and I've always preferred the one where it's like angled back. That's certainly the more common version anyway. The other thing is, as I kind of touched upon with the little Matchbox one, they've obviously done the rear wheels uncovered and the front wheels covered, and I always think they look a bit odd like that. I either prefer it with all of the wheel covers in place or all of them removed. I think the kind of this sort of half and half always looks a little bit odd, but certainly makes it a little bit more interesting, I suppose. So yes, that's kind of the Dinky Toys one produced during the 70s, and as I say, probably one of the more common ones out there. Now, as well as that one, that's in kind of a more usual olive drab, between 1972 and 1975, Dinky did a small gift set that they called Task Force, where the DUKW was included, but in this kind of unusual blue colour. Alongside it, it also came with the Ferret Scout car and the Alvis Stalwart, which I suppose is an appropriate vehicle for it to come with, although they are completely different eras to the Duck. Yeah, it's kind of an unusual colour, but it sort of looks plausible. Whether it's supposed to be kind of one that's in more of like a naval scheme or something, I don't know. It's obviously, the actual casting is exactly the same. But that's the other version that Dinky did. Again, not particularly uncommon. It's obviously less common than the green one, but it's still sort of pretty easy to find. Now, it was the Dinky Duck W that was my first ever one I got. First ever example of a Duck W I got was the Dinky one from a toy fair, and clearly repainted. But I thought the person who repainted it had done such a nice job of it. I've still kept it in my collection, even though I've obviously replaced it with decent condition original versions. I really like what they've done with this one. So you can see, obviously, it's the same vehicle, but they've picked out all of the detail, even including adding some little sort of regimental type badges, which I think is at the back there, which I think is quite a nice touch. Picking out, they've got the winch cable, they've painted the spare wheel. Whether any did appear in this sort of green and brown camouflage, I don't know, but it looks nice and it certainly makes it look a bit different. Obviously, they've also painted the windscreens and the headlights silver. Yeah, I just thought, although I knew straight away it was a repaint, I just thought it looked quite nice, and obviously it was pretty cheap. So yes, that's a repainted version of the Dinky Duck W. And then we kind of move forward to the mid-90s and the French company, Verem. Verem being a sister company of Solido, who are obviously quite a much more well-known. And Verem rather, produced this model in 1994, and it would be in production until about 1998. It's actually made of resin. Despite the size of the vehicle, it's noticeably lighter than even the sort of quite a bit smaller Dinky version. I think the Dinky version is supposed to be 1:76. This is 1:50 scale. But yeah, this is considerably lighter. But the detail on it is excellent, and I think really it's the sort of next best model following the release of the French Dinky one. This is the sort of the next sort of really good one to come out. It does mean that it is quite fragile. The sort of resin, it can get chipped quite easily. The windscreen is plastic. I think it came separately, and you kind of just attached it yourself. Also, the jerry cans that go in the little holder at the back there, and obviously you've got the spare wheel on the back. Well, you've got a quite nicely done propeller and propeller shaft underneath, and this one also includes a rudder as well. So it's a really nice one. It's actually one of my sort of favourite ones. It was released just in the standard sort of dark green coloured boxes with the yellow interior, very similar to some of the Solido boxes of the period. And as I say, it was available for about 4 years. I think these were quite expensive when they first came out. Whether that's because of the resin production's more complicated, I don't know. Also, it is quite a big model, but yeah, I think these were sort of quite pricey and not that common. This is one I got off eBay a number of years ago. They do crop up from time to time, but yeah, it's a nice one, that. And despite that being produced by Verem, it was actually also released under the Solido branding as part of their VE Day 50th anniversary range. That obviously came out in 1995. and they did at least a couple of different DUKWs, both of which were in British markings. And this particular one represents a vehicle from 30 Corps. And see, it's got the markings on the side there, and the P designation, which is what the British Army used to denote amphibians. I'm guessing A already stood for ambulance. This one, I've not attached the windscreen on it, so you can see it is just a separate little plastic bit, but it has got the sort of front glass in it. It is exactly the same moulding as the Veren one I've just shown, although the propeller is plastic on this one, not the sort of brass like on the Veren one. So this was kind of a limited edition range, as I say, produced for the 50th anniversary of VE Day, and this is one that I do actually have the box for. So I'll just move that over to one side. So yeah, all of the vehicles from this range came in this exact same style box, and then they just changed the details at the front here, so you can see amphibian 2.25 ton. It actually says, which is a surprise. I said that the vehicle it's based on is a 2.5 ton, but yeah, 2.25 ton truck, 6x6 DUKW in livery of British 30 Corps, Royal Army Service Corps, and as I say, you can see that VE Day limited edition of 780 pieces, which is kind of an unusual amount to sort of limit it to, but yeah. That was produced in 1995. And then Solido would produce their own version of it, which would be released in 2001. And this would be a diecast version. So at first glance, it looks kind of exactly the same as the Veren one. But it is, first of all, it's made of diecast, so it's noticeably heavier. But also, there's quite a few differences. The wheels are different for a start. There are actual sort of detail differences as well. So when you start to look at the two side by side, you can see that they are completely different mouldings. So this was produced by Solido from 2001 to 2005. Pretty much all metal, but you can see from how it's sort of shiny there that this interior bit is plastic. So it does actually come out. You can see, unfortunately, still that the floor of the cargo compartment is still sort of plastic. There were actually two versions of this. There was another one released between 2003 and 2006 that it had like a simulated load of jerry cans that went in the back, whereas obviously this one's just made to look like it's empty. But yeah, it's a really nice one, just done in a basic kind of US Army livery, but a really nice one, this, and it's got the same sort of propeller, shaft and rudder underneath. Sort of nice detail, and as I say, one issue with the Veren one, it's not as heavy as you kind of expect it to be, whereas this has got a nice bit of weight to it. So that's the Solido one. Just from their sort of normal range, I do actually have the box for this one as well. Let's move the vehicle out of the way. So there you go. So you see GMC DUKW 353. The 353, that just denotes that's relating to the truck that it's based on. So you can just see the box. It's the Great Famous Battles collection. They did quite a number of vehicles that were in this same sort of quite eye-catching box with the sort of British, French, Canadian and American flags on. There you go. So yeah, that's the box for that. Nothing exciting on the back. Just didn't show anything else from the range or anything. That's that. So that's the Solido one. I'll just move that one over there. Then we move into kind of 1:72 scale territory. Now, there was a company no longer going, and it must have been quite a short-lived diecast company called Blitz 72, and they seem to have done quite a small range of mostly German tanks. I think they did a Panzer III, for example, and possibly a couple of others, several different versions of. But quite randomly, they also did a DUKW. Now, I don't actually have a Blitz 72 one, but sometime in the kind of early to mid 2000s, the Polish company Amacom, who do a lot of sort of magazine part works and that kind of thing, they produced a 1:72 scale military vehicles collection. And one thing that they are kind of a bit guilty of is they did tend to copy existing manufacturers' models. The one difference being that the Amacom versions tended to be kind of noticeably cheaper, like they used a lot more plastic. And this is the Amacom version. Fortunately, it's one of the nicer ones that Amacom did. I've seen other ones from the collection, and they stick out like a sore thumb compared to the original versions. Not only is there far more plastic content, but it's like really obvious plastic. It's shiny. It just, I don't know, it just doesn't work. Just doesn't sort of look that good. But the DUKW is pretty good, and this is absolutely identical. You can see probably that's where a slight difference would be. You've got this big plastic bit at the back, whereas I'm guessing on the Blitz 72 one, that is all metal. But apart from that, it's a really nicely done model. As I say, I don't know much about Blitz 72, as they don't seem to have been going for long at all. I don't remember seeing their models for sale in model shops that much at all. As I say, I don't seem to have had like a massive range or anything like that. But yeah, it's a nice 1/72 scale model of a DUKW. So that's the Amacon version, but as I say, based on the Blitz 72 version. And then we have two examples of the same casting. Now, with these sort of part works and things like that, there does seem to be a lot of sharing of the same moulds. So here we have this one produced by, now it's either IXO or Altea. They've done like a massive range of 1/72 scale military vehicles of all eras. And as can be seen here, they did a really nice DUKW. Now, what's particularly nice about this one is, first of all, it's got the rear the cover over the cargo space, which is obviously kind of unusual for models. Secondly, I mentioned before, kind of the vast majority of ducks have been modelled in kind of World War II schemes like Western Europe, sort of US Army, British Army. This one's actually a Pacific War scheme, so it'll either be US Army or US Marines, I'm not sure which. It doesn't actually have any markings on it at all. But yeah, it represents one used in the Pacific Theatre with a really distinctive camouflage scheme. So I don't think this one was part of like a part work or anything like that. But yeah, it was produced under the branding of either IXO or Altea. They're kind of the same company, really. I've seen models released under both names. So yeah, this is one I kind of picked up off eBay a few years back. But yeah, I really like this one. It's just nice and distinct. It kind of sticks out a lot more. And I say that they were widely used in the Pacific. I think the LVT, the sort of landing vehicle tracked, or the Amtrak, as it's probably better known, is kind of more well known for its use in the Pacific. But yeah, DUKWs did get used a lot there as well. So that's the IXO or Altea one in Pacific Theatre markings. And as I say, using the same moulding, but released by under the name or under the branding of GE Fabry. This is one that was released as part of the Russian tank collection. So it was a range of, as the name suggests, Russian vehicles, all produced in 1/72. And this is supposed to be a Lend-Lease DUKW as used by the Russians. But there's actually not a single marking on it anywhere. So it would be quite easy, especially as it's just in kind of like a normal olive drab scheme with a khaki tilt. It'd be quite easy just to convert this into a US Army one or a British Army one. It's a nice mould again, similar to the Pacific Theatre one I just kind of showed you. It is die-cast and it's got like a nice bit of weight to it again. But yeah, the Russians did use these. They were given sort of like several hundred of these. Must have liked them, as post-war they produced what is kind of almost a virtual copy, obviously using a different truck chassis, different engine, things like that. One difference they did make, and this was one slight disadvantage of the DUKW, is it didn't have a loading ramp. So the only way you could kind of load things was either over the side or using a crane or something. The Russian version, which was produced after the war and in service for a number of years, did have a loading ramp fitted. But yes, this is what purports to be a Lend-Lease DUKW, and as I say, that was produced under the name of GE Fabry as part of their Russian tank collection. And then the last sort of proper, I'll just quickly show you, that was the packaging that the GE Fabry one came in. You can see it's all Russian language underneath. Just says DUKW 353 on it, and as can be seen, there was quite a number of models from this range that appeared in the discount bookshop The Works. I think it was about 10 years ago for £2 each. So as you can well imagine, I took full advantage of that and I managed to get quite a few. But yeah, I was particularly pleased to see the DUKW. And yeah, the last one I've got of the sort of normal models is the biggest one, and I would say probably the most impressive, and that's this one. So it's produced by Atlas Editions. Seems to be another sort of part work type company. I think they're a French company. And they did a range of, this is 1/43 scale. They did a range of 1/43 scale World War II military vehicles. Not tanks, it seemed to be everything but tanks. So it was like trucks, half-tracked armoured cars, ambulances, all that kind of thing, jeeps and that sort of vehicle. And I think it was a part work initially released in France, and then it was actually released in the UK. I did actually subscribe to it, and I think you got a vehicle every couple of weeks or something like that. Really nice range of vehicles, and it was proceeding quite nicely. You got like a little bit of an info card with them, and then suddenly it just stopped. The DUKW, I don't think was ever actually released as part of the UK collection. I'd managed to pick this one up off eBay from a French seller. As soon as I saw they did a DUKW as part of the range, obviously I really wanted one. And as could be expected for a vehicle of this size, the detail is really good. So similar to the two 172 ones we just looked at, it's got the splashboard in the raised position, as I say, for when it's obviously driving into the water. They obviously decided to pick out the bilge pump. You can see it in much better detail there. Boat hook mounted on the front there, as well as the Pioneer tools, a spade and an axe there. You've got the bridge classification, 10 tons, so what sort of bridges it was needed to support it. This one's obviously got the wing mirrors as well, so it looks really nice. You can see the instruments on the dashboard there, and then nicely done wheels, sort of correct looking wheels for the vehicle. And then obviously you've got the rudder and it's kind of a bit of a shame, like on some of the earlier ones, the propeller was done like in a brass, had like a sort of brass finish on it. It's kind of a shame on this size that it doesn't, but as I say, it's tucked away underneath, so it's not too bad really. And you've got like the rope fenders on the corners there. And again, you've got the anchor, the jerry cans, the winch and the spare wheel. So this is a really nice one. And I would say it's from about probably just under 10 years ago, something like that. Can't quite remember exactly when this collection came out. As I say, it did come out in France first, and then was released in the UK. I think it was one of those. It was advertised in like a military vehicle magazine, where you get the first vehicle for like £1.99, and then obviously you subscribe to it. So yeah, well that's the DUKW from Atlas Editions. Now again, I do have the box for this. It's obviously quite a big box. You can get it in shop. That's what it looked like. So it's nothing special. Again, just says DUKW or GMC DUKW 353 on the bottom. Nothing exciting on the box at all, really. Just got a little bit of photograph of a real one there. And then you can see the French language, vehicles and armour from the Second World War, and then a little bit of detail about the actual vehicle itself. There you go. So that's the box for the Atlas Editions one. So that covers kind of all of the diecast, like all that sort of proper military diecast ones that I've got. But there are actually two other little models that I kind of felt I had to include. First one is not technically diecast, but sometime in, I think it was maybe the late 60s into the 70s, Airfix released a range of these sort of polythene, sort of tough, bendy plastic military vehicles, and obviously one of them was a DUKW. It's, as you can see, sort of quite simple. The wheels do rotate. This one, unfortunately, it should have a cover over the cargo bed, unfortunately, obviously, because that's removable, and I got this second hand. That's missing. Detail's pretty good. You can see you've got the star moulded in it again, the tools, the bilge pump. I think the only bit I don't like is the windscreen's just quite basic. There's no kind of detail around the frame or anything like that. One kind of nice thing about this particular one is that it being plastic, it floats, which is obviously quite nice for a DUKW. So yeah, as I say, not die cast, but I just thought I got it to hand. I thought I'd show that one as part of the, with it being a ready-made thing. Obviously, there have been numerous model kits, but I thought obviously they're kind of outside the scope of these videos, really. But yeah, I just thought I'd show that one. And then the last one is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, really. So it's a Matchbox model produced by them in 2017. Now, although it's clearly not an accurate representation of a DUKW, it's quite obviously based on one. I mean, the actual model name, Matchbox called it the Duck, as in DUK. So yeah, it's kind of Matchbox's own interpretation. Now, this is clearly like based on one of the ones you see giving tours around various city centres. As I say at the start of the video, there were quite a number of cities that some still do to this day, but there was quite a few that had this sort of thing operating. Liverpool was one that had them until about 2013, when unfortunately after a couple of incidents where vehicles sank, thankfully without any serious injury, the company went into liquidation. There was also one that operated in London until about 2017, I think it was. Again, I think because the vehicles were quite old, I think they had an issue where one of them caught fire. I think it was actually a knock-on effect of one of the Liverpool incidents. they'd added extra buoyancy to one of the ones in London. Unfortunately, they'd not given it enough ventilation, and the actual buoyancy material caught fire. Again, thankfully, no serious injuries, but yeah, that company's no longer trading. I believe they do still operate in Dublin under the name of the Viking Duck Tours, or Splash Tours, I think it is. And there's various cities in the US that use them. So yeah, not a serious model at all, but I kind of had to include it really. So I think there's been a couple of variations of this. You've got this sort of yellow and white one, and I think there's like an orangey coloured one as well. But not really a serious model, but kind of I had to include it as part of this. So yeah, that's the Matchbox Duck Duck from 2017. So that's all the DUKWs I have. As I said, it's by no means an exhaustive list. There are some others out there. As I said, there's at least one other version of the Lone Star one. There's at least one other version of the Solido, or a couple of versions of the Solido one. And there probably are other ones out there as well that I've just not come across, probably because they're quite scarce. There's probably other similar ones. This Comet one, I think there's other companies that did similar type vehicles to that, so there'll be other ones like that out there. But yeah, that's all the ones I have. I like to think it's a pretty good representation of the DUKW in diecast. As I say, it's one of my all-time favourite vehicles, and I think it's been covered pretty well by diecast manufacturers. So as I say, this is going to be an occasional sort of sub-series, if you like, from a channel. There's other vehicles that I'm intending doing this on, include things like the Willys Jeep would be an obvious one, the Sherman tank, the M3 half-track, the Kubelwagen. So yeah, any vehicle where there's been quite a few different ones done by different companies, and obviously where I've got a decent representation of them, I'll do some videos on. So yeah, just thought it'd be interesting to cover that. And as I say, it's something else I want to be doing more of in the future. So if you are aware of any other models of DUKWs, any that have missed out, please do let me know. So I'm always always like to hear about new ones that I might not be familiar with. So, but in the meantime, please do like, share, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.